All right, welcome back. I want to talk to you about persuasion, and I really want to talk to you about how do you use every one of these strategies, but how do you use them with the utmost ethics. And this is really about all the frames that I put behind all of my trainings. And so, the first frame I really want you to think about is how to use persuasion and how are you going to use these strategies. And the reason I bring this up now is this is because sometimes I get the idea is that, hey, Matt, this sounds like you're trying to manipulate people or this is manipulation. And you know what? It all is in the eye of the beholder and the person using it. So, what I really encourage you to use this is use these strategies for the utmost ethics. Now, how do you decide if it's ethically used or not? Well, it has to be a win-win situation. Now, I've been in many business dealings where I felt the other side was not trying to make it a win-win situation. They were trying to make it that they win and I lose. And believe me, I've been on the losing side of many deals. I've also been on the winning side of a lot of deals. But what I'm saying is that the people that I was dealing with, I could tell up front that they weren't using the business strategy, the business dealings we had with the utmost ethics. And so I really encourage you that you have to utilize all these strategies with the utmost ethics. How do you identify the utmost ethics? One, you have to be selling a great product. Are you utilizing a great product? Two, is it a win-win situation for you and the other person? So I really want you to start thinking about is just, am I using this for the benefit of both people and for the benefit of everybody involved? So everything you ever utilize with other people should be utilized to increase the value of the relationship from both sides. So please always keep that in mind. The other thing is this. So how important is your ability to communicate? So Stanford Research Institute did a study, and what they found is that 12.5% of your success is determined by your knowledge. The other 87.5% is your ability to deal with people. And so really what I think about is that 87.5% of your success comes down to your soft skills, which is your ability to communicate. And 12.5% is based on your product knowledge. So when you put your ability to communicate plus your product knowledge equals you in closing sales. So it's really important because we always become so technically proficient at our jobs and the products we have, but ultimately you have to become great at communicating that. And so I always say is that every product, every individual, and every company has a great story. What is your story? I look at the top left picture there and I think of the Wright brothers. So the Wright brothers have a great story. Here they were, some bicycle shop owners, and they are credited for inventing man-powered flight. But think about this. Here's a bunch of bike shop owners, and they went to their buddies and said, hey, we have a great idea. We're going to put you in this wooden plane. We're going to put you up 30 feet in the air and see if it flies. But somehow they convinced their whole team to get on board and invent man-powered flight. Now, I don't know if you ever heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley. Well, he was funded by the United States government to invent man-powered flight, and he failed abysmally. And why? Because his story was one of fame and power, where the Wright brothers were just one of passion. And so what's your story? And your story has to be backed and fueled by passion. The more passionate that your story that is fueled with, the more people are going to get on board. Maybe you read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl talks about Holocaust and people who survived the internment camps and during the Holocaust. And what he found is this, is that some of the people in the camps were trading cigarettes for food, and the other ones were trading their food for cigarettes. Now, and what he found is the ones that were trading their cigarettes for food had the passion. They could see beyond the bars. They had a bigger why beyond the bars, right? And the people who were just trading their food for the cigarettes just wanted that immediate gratification. And so ultimately your story has to be one of, what are you driving to? What's your passion? What's your deeper seated passion for you, your business, your company, your product? And so ultimately, among the the people in the Holocaust, he said, is that among the mud, some saw the bars while others saw the stars. So is the story you're telling one of shooting for the stars, or one of just trying to get past and stay alive within the bars? And so we want you to have a story and start thinking about, how do you craft that story? People buy your story, but it has to be one of passion. Maybe you've heard the Sylvester Stallone story. So he was living on the streets in New York, and just to get warm, he would go into the library. And as he was going into the library, he started reading books. And as he was reading books, he started reading books on how to write a screenplay. And that's how he wrote Rocky. So he wrote Rocky. He's living on the streets, going into libraries just to stay warm. He goes out and he sells the screenplay of Rocky, and he sells it for something like $100,000. And they say, we'll give you $100,000. And he said, okay, well, the condition is I need to star in the movie. And they said, no, you're crazy. So here he was living on the streets, putting conditions on $100,000. And if you think back to the 70s, $100,000 was a lot more than it is today. And so he said, well, I have to star in the movie. And they said, well, we'll give you $30,000 if you star in the movie. Now, if he didn't have that story and that passion behind it, we would never know who Sylvester Stallone is today. And so he had a passion that it wasn't selling out for necessarily any money. He had a bigger dream. He was shooting for the stars, not just for a quick dollar. And so same with you, same with your business, same with your product, is you have to have that passion to really have true success. And I always say, what's your story? And so your story has to be developed. Maybe you've heard of you have to start with why. I'm going to share with you some secrets on starting with why during this video training series. But ultimately, what is your story? And think about Martin Luther King. When he got, I think it was like 250,000 people to the Washington Mall on that great fateful day. Did he get them there because he said, hey, I have some great strategies? Did he get them there because he said, I have a 10-point plan? No, he got them there because he had a dream. And you can write this down. We make decisions based emotionally, and we justify them logically. The easiest way to think about this is, have you ever bought a car? Have you ever bought a house? And when you go to buy that car or that house, you had a budget in mind. And I ask you this, did you spend more than your budget? Of course you did. Because you base your decisions on emotion, and you find the logic to justify it. So you go in, you say, I'm going to buy this house, here's my budget, but you get in there and it feels better, it smells better, you have emotions attached that you start justifying spending more money. And so all decisions are based emotionally and justified by logic. So just like Martin Luther King, you have to start with a dream and then follow it up with a 10-point plan. You don't start with a 10-point plan and follow it up with a dream. This is all based in science, and you might have heard the difference between the limbic brain and the neocortex. The limbic brain is the oldest part of the brain. It is the part of the brain that only deals in symbols and colors and smells and stories and archetypes of the world. Some people say the limbic brain is acting 6 seconds before our neocortex, our logical brain, kicks in and makes us consciously aware. So essentially our limbic brain is making a decision 6 seconds before our neocortex steps in and adds logic to that decision. And so, like I said, the limbic brain is responsible for all the bodily fluids, all the chemical reactions in the body, and that's, essentially that happens before we become consciously aware of it in our neocortex. Our neocortex is our logical brain. It's where all the data, stats, figures. And so when you look at this, why do you think that neocortex you can have, what I mean by that, what I'm trying to get is, you can have a debate with somebody that's such an emotional debate. So you could talk politics, you can talk religion, so emotionally charged, but the logic's out the window. Because our limbic brain is acting first and our neocortex is trying to just find the logic behind it, just trying to find any logic to support that emotion. And so really our emotions are happening before our logic. So if you can connect with somebody emotionally, they'll start justifying it logically. You may have read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. He said we make a decision in under a half a second of whether we like somebody or not, and we spend the next 30 seconds trying to justify that decision, and we very, very rarely change that decision. So all of our decisions are based on the limbic brain. And so how do you attach to the limbic brain? How do you present to the limbic brain? How do you communicate to the limbic brain? How do you communicate emotionally with people? And so I kind of share with you this three layered approach, if you will. A lot of my research is based in also a guy named Wright Garrett Hammer talks about 3 layers of the brain. And when you really look at it, the 3 layers of the brain are all responsible for different responsibilities when it comes to communication, decision making, communicating with ourselves, and communicating with other people. So the limbic brain, they call it the crocodile brain, is the oldest part of the brain. And the midbrain is kind of the social aspect of the brain. And then the neocortex is what I just talked about, is the logical part of the brain. Let me share with you how the 3 of these come into play when making a decision, and how you can use these with volition in making, 1, your own decisions, but 2, is helping other people make decisions, and so you can essentially influence other people. At the base, you have the crocodile brain. This is fight or flight, right? Either it's based in fear. It's based in, hey, if you look at it, the crocodile brain, the limbic brain, is always looking to protect us and preserve us. It still operates as if we're being chased by saber-toothed tigers. So in communication, it's the part of the brain that says, do I pay attention or not pay attention? And so really, when you come in to talk to somebody, you have to grab their attention before their mind starts wandering. And this is the part of brain. And so how does this brain react? Like I said, it's fight or flight. It deals in dopamine and norepinephrine. And so dopamine is the fear of missing out, and epinephrine is the fear of loss, the fear of attack. And so the 2002 Nobel Prize winner says we are 2.5 times more fearful of loss than we are fearful of missing out on something. So you can take that within your presentation and your communication strategies. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But ultimately, the crocodile brain operates in fear of missing out and fear of loss. It's that fight or flight. So let me explain how these 3 come together and shape for you from fear, from fight or flight, to social context, to also logical decisions. So here I live by the United Center in Chicago. I live in a fairly good neighborhood, but 2 blocks north is still a very, it's essentially the ghetto. And so one night I was coming home and I was pulling into my alley, and as I was pulling down my alley, I noticed a car follow me into the alley. So what happened? Boom. My limbic brain kicked in. Fight or flight. I got scared. Who's following me in? I looked up. What I did is I noticed it was not one of my neighbors. So right away I started trying to put social context around it. I noticed it was not one of my neighbors. It looked like a car that was on its last leg. When I was growing up from the south side of Chicago, we called this a hoopty, if you will. So I noticed it was a hoopty. So social context said, hey, this isn't one of my neighbors. So logically, I said, Matt, you got to do something here. You can't pull in your garage and have yourself cornered in case it is something. So what it is, I pulled out the other side of the alley, went around the block. The car followed me until I took a couple more turns. The car was gone. So what happened was, boom, limbic brain stepped in, fight or flight. Who is this? Put social context around it, and then lastly, some logic to it. And that's ultimately what your clients are doing, and all our clients are doing when we present products and present our ideas. So what we talk about here is, how do you hit the limbic brain? Now here's a psychological theory, if you will, called a hot cognition. It's a hypothesis on motivated reasoning in which a person's thinking is influenced by their emotional state. And so how do you generate an emotional state? How do you generate an emotional movement? A lot of things I talk about is state shift, and this is a little bit beyond this training here, but we talk about how do you shift somebody's state? How do you hit them with a hot cognition? And a hot cognition is really, to me, is how do you fire that dopamine, that neurotransmitter, which is the reward system of the brain. Now think about this. Dopamine is the fear of missing out. How many times a day do you check your phone? How many times a day do you check your phone, looking at your email and looking at Facebook, and nothing's on there? It's all crap. But it's a fear of missing out. We get a hit of dopamine every time we look at our phone. And so in your communication is, how do you hit the dopamine in your presentations, in your communication, whoever you're talking with in business, is how do you give them that kind of fear of missing out, or the things that they could have that you hold for them. The other one is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is the part of the brain that basically is a fight or flight response. It's that fear. It's that tension in your body. And so that fear of loss. So in your presentation here, you want to put, and in your communication, is the fear of loss. So how do you hit the dopamine, the norepinephrine, the fear of missing out, and the fear of loss? Again, a little bit beyond here, but we do have a hot cognition exercise that we utilize in my trainings and on my e-learning platform and things. But I just want to give you the ideas here. This is a little bit even beyond, I think, than the book goes, is just really how do you communicate in such a way where you're hitting the fear of missing out and the fear of loss within each one of your strategies. And we use what's called hot cognitions. A hot cognition is something that's going to really fire the brain into paying attention. So if you have the fear of loss and the fear of missing out, the tension and the dopamine, the norepinephrine and the dopamine create attention. And so how do you do that? And it's through hot cognition. So that's one of the frames that I believe in setting up all my trainings. The other thing is feed the alpha dog. And so in all business, you're either the alpha dog or you're the beta. And so I kind of use the metaphor of it this way, is when you don't need business, you're the alpha dog. When you need business, you beta yourself. It's like kind of that, you're projecting that sense of need. And so, right away, another way we do this in business is I think about how many meetings have I had in downtown Chicago. The first thing I do is when I walk into the building, you go up to the security desk. What do they do at the security desk? They say, hey, you don't belong here. Write down your name, give us your driver's license, and stick this thing right on your chest. And we're going to call upstairs because they don't have you on the list today. So right away, they're saying you don't belong here. And then you go upstairs and right away, you have this sticker that says, hey, I'm a guest, that somebody put on your lapel of your jacket or your blouse or whatever. And you go in and right away you meet the person that you're supposed to meet that day, and you subserviently say, wow, thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm so honored to be here today. You start saying all these things. And so what I say is this, is you want to walk into any place like you're the CEO. Now, you don't need to have a chip on the shoulder like I did when I was young. You don't have to have Napoleon complex like I may or may not still have. But what you have to do is, how do you walk in so you act and look like the CEO? So when you're walking around, they say, hey, that's not our CEO, but that person's acting like a CEO. They must be here to see our CEO. We better give them respect. And so really it's just, how do you feed that alpha dog in your mind? And it's that alpha dog, and here it is that you're the prize. You are the prize, not the money. There's an infinite amount of money, there's an infinite amount of opportunity, there's only a limited amount of you. And so how do you kind of continuously position yourself as the alpha and feed the alpha dog mentally? Now, we have many trainings that go into feeding the alpha dog and changing your mental state and make sure you have self-confidence and things like that. But ultimately, just one of the frames is make sure you're feeding the alpha dog in each one of your presentations and each one of your interactions where you're trying to communicate some sort of value and get some kind of prize for it. And so we've also identified a sales communication model. And so I identified this, I adapted this from neuro-linguistic programming, and it really just is to identify where do most people communicate and what level do they communicate at. And so most people, in any communication, you can communicate at the abstract. At the bottom, you can communicate the specifics. And so let me explain to this. So you come here, the abstract is, hey, the weather's great. How do you look today? Oh, you look great. Wow, thanks for having me. Then you get to specifics, you jump right into the product. And so what we're saying is then, the difference is the big picture and the details. And so you can communicate around your client's goals and problems, or you can communicate around your product. Now, if I asked you, and I asked the majority of salespeople out there, business professionals, where do you think most communications start? Do they start at the goals and problems of the client, or do they start around the product and the details? That's right. They start around the product and the details when you know they need to start around the goals and problems. Now, when you think about the goals and problems, what does that remind you of? Goals, something I'm missing out on, dopamine, problems, norepinephrine, fear of loss. I liken it between the forest and the trees. And so you've probably heard this metaphor before. And when you look at this metaphor, so let's take a look at the trees. So if you're lost among the trees, how do you get out? I always tell the joke that if I'm with my wife, you ask her which way, you go the opposite way, you're home free. But ultimately, don't tell her I tell that either. But if you chunk up to the forest and you can see the forest, you can see where to navigate. And that's ultimately what you need to do when you communicate and you're trying to communicate your value, you're trying to sell somebody, trying to persuade somebody, you're trying to get something from somebody. What are their goals? What are their problems? And that will help you navigate your communication strategies. When you look at neurolinguistic programming, what neurolinguistic programming has presuppositions of language that lead into this communication model, if you will. There's 19 language patterns that control the big picture. There's something called the meta model that controls the details. Lateral thoughts are reframing and stories. And so there's a lot that goes beyond the sales communication model, but I thought to offer you a ton of value beyond just the book and buying the book. And I appreciate you buying the book, but I wanted to give you so much more value. I know it's the first, $5 or $6 that you spent with me, but you can see here you're getting hundreds of dollars, there's thousands of dollars of valuable content and valuable communication strategies. So here are the frames that ultimately are going to lead to your success. And I think each one of them in of themselves probably need to be thought about for 3 days and practiced for 3 days for you to start having success. And the more you practice with them, the more that they become ingrained in your unconscious mind. And that is ultimately where communication comes from, is our unconscious communication patterns and strategies. So there are the frames, and some frames I've identified for all communication, and some frames up front that I've identified for you to have more success starting right now.